My name is Burton. I'm 33 years old, and I never thought I'd be the kind of person sharing family drama online. But when you're lying in a hospital bed with crushing medical bills, and you discover your parents just bought your brother a $400,000 vacation home after refusing to help you, well, that changes a person. The betrayal cuts deeper than any surgical incision, and it forced me to finally see the lifelong pattern of favoritism that I'd been denying for decades. Before I dive into how my own family left me drowning in medical debt, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family. I grew up in what most people would consider a privileged environment, an upper-middle-class neighborhood in suburban Connecticut, with manicured lawns and good schools. From the outside, we had everything: a 4-bedroom colonial with a 2-car garage, family vacations to Florida every winter, and parents who seemed involved in our lives. But appearances can be deceiving. My father, Richard, worked as an investment banker in New York City. He commuted an hour each way, leaving before dawn and returning just in time for dinner. He was stern, traditional, and had very specific ideas about what made a man successful. My mother, Margaret, worked as a real estate agent locally, which gave her a flexible schedule to attend school events and drive us to activities. She was a people pleaser by nature, and almost always deferred to my father's opinions and decisions. Then there was my brother Wesley, 3 years younger than me. From the moment he could walk, it was clear he was cut from the same cloth as my father: athletic, outgoing, and naturally competitive. I, on the other hand, was quiet and intellectual. While Wesley was scoring touchdowns in Pop Warner football, I was building my first computer in our basement. The signs of favoritism were subtle at first, so subtle that as a child, I thought it was normal. In our living room, there was an entire shelf dedicated to Wesley's sports trophies, medals, and team photos. My academic certificates and science fair ribbons were tucked into a drawer in my father's study. When I won the state math competition in 6th grade, my mother said, "That's nice, honey," and put the certificate on the refrigerator for a week. When Wesley made the junior varsity football team as a freshman, my parents took the whole family out to celebrate at an expensive steakhouse. Weekends in our house revolved around Wesley's sporting events. My father never missed a game, proudly wearing school colors and cheering from the sidelines. He'd spend hours in the backyard teaching Wesley how to throw a perfect spiral or improve his batting stance. When I asked my father to look at a program I'd coded to solve algebraic equations, he'd say, "Maybe later, Burton," but later never came. My mother would occasionally sit with me while I explained my latest project, but I could always tell she didn't really understand or value what I was doing. Family vacations were scheduled around Wesley's tournament schedules. If I had a robotics competition the same weekend as Wesley's regional baseball tournament, there was never any question about which event my parents would attend. "Your thing doesn't need spectators," my father would say. "You'll be fine on your own." The first major incident that made the favoritism impossible to ignore happened when we turned 16. In our family, 16 was supposed to be a big milestone. When my birthday came, my parents gave me driving lessons. Practical and necessary, but hardly exciting. 3 years later, when Wesley turned 16, my parents surprised him with a brand new Ford Mustang with custom rims and a premium sound system. I still remember the hollow feeling in my chest as Wesley revved the engine in our driveway while my father beamed with pride. "Your brother needs a reliable car for getting to practices and games," my mother explained when she saw my expression. "And you know you're not really interested in cars anyway." The implication was clear. Wesley's activities mattered more than mine, and his happiness was worth the investment. When it came time for college, I worked hard and earned a partial scholarship to a prestigious tech university. My parents covered what the scholarship didn't, but I still worked part-time at the campus IT department to pay for books and personal expenses. Wesley, on the other hand, got average grades and attended an expensive private college where my parents paid the full tuition, room and board, and gave him a generous monthly allowance. While I was balancing classes and work, Wesley was joining a fraternity and focusing on his social life. "Your brother isn't as academically inclined as you," my father said, when I questioned the discrepancy. "He needs to make connections for his future. You've always been self-sufficient, Burton. It's one of your best qualities." At the time, I took it as a compliment. I told myself that being independent was a virtue, that I didn't need my parents' financial or emotional support to succeed. I normalized the treatment, believing that Wesley simply needed more help than I did. Looking back now, I realize how damaging it was to internalize that message, that somehow I deserved less support and love from my own parents because I was capable of surviving without it. By the time I graduated college, I had fully accepted my role in the family. I was the self-reliant one, the one who didn't need anything from anyone. It became both my armor and my prison. After graduating with honors, I accepted a job offer from a tech firm in Boston. Moving 5 hours away from my family felt like breathing fresh air for the first time. In Connecticut, I was always Wesley's quiet older brother, or Richard and Margaret's son who works with computers. In Boston, I could just be Burton, a talented software developer with a bright future. I threw myself into my work with everything I had. While my coworkers went out for drinks after work or spent their weekends exploring the city, I stayed at my desk learning new programming languages and volunteering for additional projects. My dedication didn't go unnoticed. 8 months after starting, I received my first promotion, jumping ahead of colleagues who had been there longer. "You have an exceptional ability to solve problems that stump everyone else," my manager said during my performance review. "The senior team has noticed your contributions." That simple acknowledgement meant more to me than any praise I'd ever received from my parents. As my reputation in the company grew, so did my confidence. I developed innovative solutions for clients that saved them millions in operational costs. My name began appearing in company-wide emails recognizing exceptional work. For the first time in my life, I felt truly valued for exactly who I was. While my career flourished, I slowly built a life independent from my family. I joined a local programming meetup, where I met other tech enthusiasts who spoke my language. We would spend hours debating the merits of different frameworks or collaborating on open-source projects. These people didn't care about sports or social status. They appreciated intellect and creativity, the very things my family had always dismissed. Dating was more challenging. My workaholic tendencies didn't leave much room for romantic relationships. I did date a woman named Emma for about 6 months, but she eventually ended things, telling me that she felt like she was competing with my laptop for attention. "There's more to life than work, Burton," she said, as she walked out of my apartment for the last time. The breakup stung, but not enough to change my priorities. As I created distance from my family, I established my own holiday traditions. For Thanksgiving, I joined community meals with other holiday orphans who couldn't or didn't want to travel home. For Christmas, I sometimes accepted invitations from coworkers or simply treated myself to a good meal and a new tech gadget. These quiet celebrations were peaceful compared to the tense family gatherings I remembered, where conversations inevitably centered around Wesley's latest achievements. My calls home became less frequent, from weekly to monthly to occasional. My visits were limited to major holidays, and even then, I would stay for the minimum socially acceptable time. The physical distance naturally created emotional distance. Our conversations became superficial, weather work in the vaguest terms, local news. My parents rarely asked specific questions about my life, and I stopped offering details. Meanwhile, Wesley was struggling to find his footing after college. He bounced between jobs, never staying anywhere longer than a year. "The corporate world just isn't creative enough for Wesley," my mother would explain during our brief calls. "He's exploring his options." What she didn't say, but what I knew from family friends, was that my parents were supporting him financially through these explorations. When Wesley decided to move back home temporarily at 27, my parents welcomed him with open arms. The contrast in how we were treated continued. My parents would call me for tech support when their computer crashed, or when they couldn't figure out how to use their new phones. But our conversations rarely went deeper than troubleshooting. They spoke proudly about Wesley landing an entry-level position at a friend's company, but barely acknowledged when I was promoted to senior developer, with a team under my supervision. Despite the emotional toll, I was achieving the financial stability I had always craved. By 30, I had saved enough for a down payment on a modest apartment in a desirable Boston neighborhood. I invested wisely in both retirement accounts and the stock market. I was planning for a future where I would never need to ask anyone for help. There was a certain pride in my self-sufficiency, in knowing that I had built a good life entirely on my own merits. But beneath that pride was a deep hurt, a child's longing for parental approval and support that never seemed to come. I had stopped consciously seeking their validation. But some part of me still hoped that one day they would see me, really see me, and be proud of the man I had become. The night that changed everything was nothing special at first. It was January, and Boston was in the grip of a typical New England winter. I had stayed late at the office, working on a critical project deadline, and was driving home around 9 in the evening. Light snow had been falling all day, creating that deceptive winter wonderland effect that masks dangerous road conditions. I remember checking my rearview mirror and adjusting my speed as I approached a curve on the highway. What I didn't see was the patch of black ice stretching across my lane. One moment I was driving carefully, and the next my car was spinning out of control. I remember the surreal feeling as the car slid toward the guardrail, the strange slow-motion moment when I realized I couldn't stop what was happening. The impact was violent. Metal-crunched glass shattered, and my body was thrown against the restraints of my seatbelt. The airbag deployed with a force that felt like being punched by a boxer. When the motion finally stopped, I was hanging awkwardly in my seat, the car having come to rest at an angle against the guardrail. My first coherent thought was surprise that I was conscious. My second was the recognition of pain radiating from seemingly everywhere. I don't know how long I sat there dazed and hurting before I became aware of someone tapping on my window. A middle-aged man in a heavy winter coat was gesturing for me to roll down the window. When I couldn't manage it, he forced the door open instead. "Don't move," he said, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I've called an ambulance. They're on their way." The wait for the ambulance, the ride to the hospital, the initial assessment in the emergency room, from ended, it all blurs together in my memory. Pain medications made everything foggy. I remember fragments, the ceiling lights flashing by, as I was wheeled through corridors, a doctor with kind eyes, explaining something about surgery, a nurse inserting an IV line into my arm. When I fully regained clarity the next morning, a doctor was standing at the foot of my bed reviewing a chart. She introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Patel, the orthopedic surgeon who had operated on me during the night. "You've got multiple fractures in your right leg and pelvis," she explained, her tone professional but compassionate. "We've inserted pins to stabilize the bones. You also had some internal bleeding that we've managed to control. And you're dealing with a concussion from the impact. How long will recovery take?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "You're looking at several months of physical therapy after discharge," Dr. Patel said. "The first 6 weeks will be the most intensive. You won't be able to put weight on your right leg during that time." As the doctor continued explaining the recovery process, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I lived alone in a third-floor apartment with no elevator. I had a demanding job that required long hours. I had no family nearby to help with daily tasks, like grocery shopping or laundry. My friend Ryan was the first person to visit me in the hospital. He arrived with my phone charger, a change of clothes, and my laptop. "You look like hell," he said, pulling a chair up to my bedside. "Feel like it too," I admitted. "Thanks for bringing my stuff." "No problem. The nurses said you'll be here for at least a week. I'll check on your apartment and water that sad plant you keep forgetting about." Over the next few days, my coworkers sent flowers and get well messages. My team set up a rotation to handle my projects while I was out. Ryan visited daily, bringing anything I needed, and keeping me updated on the outside world. My parents called when Ryan used my phone to inform them about the accident. My mother sounded appropriately concerned, asking about my injuries and treatment. My father was more pragmatic, asking if I had good insurance and if I needed them to contact anyone on my behalf. Neither offered to come to Boston, citing the distance and the winter weather making travel difficult. Wesley didn't call at all. It wasn't until I met with the hospital financial counselor that the full impact of my situation hit me. I had health insurance through my employer, but it was a high-deductible plan. The emergency surgery had been performed by an out-of-network surgeon because the in-network specialist wasn't available that night. Between the deductible coinsurance and out-of-network charges, I was looking at over $75,000 in medical bills. Additionally, my disability insurance would only cover 60% of my salary during recovery, and there was a 2-week waiting period before benefits kicked in. As someone who had always prided myself on financial independence, The numbers were staggering. I had savings, but not enough to cover this level of expense without seriously depleting my emergency fund and potentially having to tap into retirement accounts, incurring penalties and taxes. After a sleepless night weighing my options, I made one of the hardest phone calls of my life. With my heart pounding in my chest, I called my parents and asked for help. "Mom, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been looking at the medical bills and they're going to be substantial. My insurance isn't covering everything, and with the lost income during recovery. I hate to ask this, but I could use some financial help. Just to get through the next few months until I'm back on my feet. I can pay you back on a schedule." The silence on the other end of the line felt eternal. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "That's a difficult position to be in, Burton. How much are we talking about?" I explained the projected costs in detail, laying out exactly what I needed and why. "Well," my father said slowly, "that's a significant amount. Your mother and I will need to discuss this. We have several investments tied up right now that aren't liquid. Let me look at our finances and call you back." "Okay," I said, relief mixing with anxiety. "Thank you for considering it." "Get some rest," my mother added before hanging up. "We'll call you tomorrow." For the next 24 hours, I fluctuated between hope and doubt. Part of me believed that surely in this genuine crisis, my parents would step up and help their son. Another part, the part that remembered a lifetime of being secondary to Wesley, prepared for disappointment. The call came the next evening. I recognized my father's ringtone and answered immediately. "Burton." He began, his voice carrying the formal tone he used for difficult conversations. "Your mother and I have discussed your situation, and while we sympathize with your predicament, we don't feel we can help financially right now. We have several investment commitments that can't be altered, and liquidating assets would incur significant penalties." I felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. "I see," was all I could manage to say. "Have you looked into payment plans with the hospital?" He continued, his tone switching to problem-solving mode. "Or perhaps you could use credit cards temporarily. I know the interest isn't ideal, but it would get you through the immediate crisis." "Yes, I'll figure something out," I said automatically, years of self-reliance kicking in to mask the hurt. "Don't worry about it. You've always been resourceful, Burton. We're confident you'll handle this." There was an awkward pause before he added, "Keep us updated on your recovery." After we hung up, I lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling, a strange numbness spreading through me. It wasn't just about the money. It was the realization that even in a genuine emergency, I couldn't count on my parents' support. Whatever emotional barrier I had maintained, whatever hope I had harbored that in a true crisis they would be there for me, it was gone, now shattered as completely as my bones had been in the accident. After a week in the hospital, I was discharged with prescriptions, follow-up appointments, and a wheelchair I'd need to use until I could manage crutches. Ryan had prepared my apartment as best he could, moving furniture to create wider pathways and setting up a makeshift bedroom in my living room so I wouldn't have to navigate the stairs to my loft bedroom. "I stocked your fridge and set up your laptop on this adjustable table," he said, showing me the temporary workstation he'd created. "And I programmed all your delivery apps with your address so you can order anything you need." "I don't know how to thank you," I said, genuinely moved by his friendship. Ryan shrugged. "Just get better. And maybe remember this next time I need help moving apartments." The first few weeks of recovery were a blur of pain medication and frustration. Simple tasks like showering or preparing food became complicated operations. I started working remotely part-time, mainly to preserve my sanity, rather than out of financial necessity, though the additional income certainly helped. Financial reality set in quickly. I used a significant portion of my savings for the initial hospital bills. I cut every non-essential expense from my budget. I called the hospital billing department and set up a payment plan for the remaining balance, wincing at the monthly amount that would be automatically withdrawn from my account for the next 5 years. Despite my best efforts to stay positive, depression crept in during those isolated weeks. The physical pain was constant, the financial stress overwhelming, and the sense of abandonment by my family left an emotional wound that seemed to be healing much more slowly than my physical injuries. My parents called occasionally to check on my recovery, But our conversations remained superficial. They never revisited the financial discussion, and I was too proud to bring it up again. Wesley never called at all. It was about 3 weeks after my discharge when everything changed. I was mindlessly scrolling through social media one evening, a rare moment of distraction from work and physical therapy exercises, when a post caught my attention. It was from Wesley, not someone I followed closely, but he had tagged my parents in the post, which made it appear in my feed. The post showed Wesley standing proudly in front of a gorgeous lakefront property. His arm was around a woman I didn't recognize, and they were both beaming. The caption read, "New beginnings at our Lake George retreat. Massive thanks to Mom and Dad for the most generous gift ever. Can't wait to create memories here for years to come. Blessed vacation home. Family generosity." I stared at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. The timestamp showed the post was just 2 days old. More photos followed in the carousel. A spacious, open-plan living room with cathedral ceilings, a wraparound deck with stunning lake views, a master bedroom with a fireplace and ensuite bathroom. My stomach lurched, and for a moment, I thought I might actually be sick. 3 weeks after telling me they couldn't help with my medical bills, and bills that were the result of a serious accident, not a luxury or choice, my parents had bought Wesley a vacation home. I closed the app and set my phone down, my hands shaking. Perhaps there was some explanation. Maybe the house wasn't as expensive as it looked. Maybe it was a timeshare or a partial ownership. Maybe they had planned this long before my accident and couldn't back out. The next day, I called Janet, a family friend who had known my parents for decades and who had always been kind to me. Under the guise of catching up, I mentioned seeing Wesley's post. "Oh yes," Janet said cheerfully. "Your parents are so generous. They bought that place outright for him, $400,000. They said Wesley needed a stable investment after all his job changes. Apparently, he's going to rent it out part of the year for income. Isn't that wonderful?" $400,000. More than 5 times what I had asked to borrow. Not even as a gift, but as a loan I intended to repay. And they had done this just 2 weeks after refusing to help me with medical bills that weren't my fault, bills that were causing me significant financial hardship. After hanging up with Janet, the numbness I had felt in the hospital gave way to something else. A white-hot rage that I had never experienced before. Years of suppressed hurt, of accepting less, of making excuses for their behavior. It all boiled over, in a moment of clarity so painful it took my breath away. I sat in my wheelchair in the middle of my apartment and began to cry. Not quiet tears, but deep, racking sobs that seemed to come from the very core of my being. I hadn't cried like this since I was a child. All the emotions I had bottled up over the years came pouring out, the hurt of being overlooked, the loneliness of being the less loved child, the grinding unfairness of it all. When the tears finally stopped, I felt hollow but somehow clearer. The question that had haunted me my entire life, what had I done wrong to deserve less love than my brother, suddenly seemed irrelevant. This wasn't about me or anything I had done. This was about them and their inexplicable preference for Wesley, a preference so strong it overrode basic parental instincts to care for a child in need. For the next 2 days, I drafted and deleted dozens of messages to my parents. Part of me wanted to lash out in anger, to hurt them as deeply as they had hurt me. Another part wanted to present a logical case, laying out the pattern of favoritism with evidence they couldn't deny. But mostly I just wanted them to acknowledge what they had done and explain how they could justify such blatant inequality. Finally, I picked up the phone and called my father directly. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Burton, how's the recovery going?" he asked, his tone casual, as if nothing had happened. "I saw Wesley's post about the vacation home," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. $400,000. "Dad, 2 weeks after you told me you couldn't help with my medical bills." There was a pause then. My father's voice took on a defensive edge. "That's a completely different situation, Burton. Your brother has different needs than you do. He's struggled to find stability, and this investment will give him both a home and potential income." "And what about my needs?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the emotions churning inside me. I wasn't asking for a vacation home. I was asking for help after a serious accident. "You've always been the capable one," my father replied, as if that explained everything. Wesley needs more support to find his way. You've got a good job savings. You'll figure it out like you always do. I heard my mother in the background asking what was happening. My father must have covered the phone because their voices became muffled. When he returned, his tone was firmer. I don't appreciate this attitude, Burton. Your mother and I have always supported both our sons in different ways. Just because you don't see everything we do doesn't mean we haven't been fair. Fair. The word came out as a harsh laugh. There's nothing fair about this. You've always favored Wesley. I've spent my entire life trying to earn the same love and support you give him automatically. That's not true, my father insisted. We love you both equally. Love isn't just words, Dad. It's actions. And your actions have always made it clear who matters more. The conversation devolved from there, years of pent-up feelings spilling out on both sides. My father became increasingly defensive. My mother occasionally chiming in with placating words that did nothing to address the core issue. By the end of the call, nothing was resolved, but everything had changed. The unspoken dynamic that had shaped our family for decades had finally been dragged into the light. The days following my confrontation with my parents were filled with awkward attempts at justification from their side. My mother called the next morning, her voice tight with emotion. Your father and I have been discussing your concerns, she began cautiously. We want you to know that we've always tried to give both you and Wesley what you each needed. And what I needed was to be left on my own with crushing medical debt, while Wesley needed a luxury lakefront property. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Wesley has had a difficult time finding his path. My mother continued as if she hadn't heard me. After his last job didn't work out, he was really struggling with his self-esteem. The house is an investment in his future, something to give him stability and purpose. And what about my future, my stability? Did that factor into your decision at all? You've always been different, Burton, she said, her voice taking on a pleading quality. You've always been independent, focused, capable of handling whatever comes your way. Wesley isn't like that. He needs more tangible support. The conversation continued in circles, with my mother trying different angles to justify their decision without ever acknowledging the fundamental unfairness of it. My father called the next day with a similar message, though his approach was more direct. I think you're being selfish here, Burton, he said, after a brief exchange of pleasantries. Your brother has real needs that this property addresses. You're just envious because you think everything should be divided equally, regardless of circumstance. This isn't about equal division, Dad, I replied, struggling to keep my voice level. This is about the fact that when I had a genuine need, not a want-a need, you turned your back on me, and then immediately gave Wesley something he didn't need at all. You're a grown man with a successful career, my father countered. You should be grateful for all we've done for you over the years, instead of counting dollars and cents like we're some kind of bank. After several days of these conversations leading nowhere, I finally decided to make my position clear in one final call. I waited until evening, when I knew both my parents would be home, and called their landline. I've been thinking about everything that's happened. I began when they answered, putting me on speakerphone. And I want to be very clear about something. This isn't about the money. It never was. It's about the fact that throughout my life, I've received less attention, less support, and less consideration than Wesley has. When I needed you, really needed you, you weren't there for me. Not because you couldn't be, but because you chose not to be. I paused, gathering my thoughts before continuing. I don't expect you to suddenly change how you feel or how you allocate your resources. That's your right. But I need to protect myself emotionally going forward, which means I need some distance from this family dynamic. I'll be limiting my contact for a while until I figure out what kind of relationship I can have with you that doesn't leave me feeling worthless. My mother started to protest, but I continued. This isn't a punishment or an attempt to manipulate you. It's self-preservation. I hope someday we can have a healthier relationship, but right now I need space. After that call, there was silence from my parents' end. No calls, no messages, no emails. The only contact from my family came in the form of an angry text from Wesley. A week later, way to make Mom cry for days. They've done everything for us, and you're acting like a victim. Grow up and get over yourself. I didn't respond. What could I say that would penetrate the bubble of privilege my brother had lived in his entire life? How could I make him understand what it felt like to always be the afterthought, the less important son? Meanwhile, my physical recovery continued. I graduated from the wheelchair to crutches, began more intensive physical therapy, and returned to full-time work, albeit remotely. The pain gradually lessened, though certain movements still sent sharp reminders of the trauma my body had endured. The financial consequences of the accident were less quick to heal. My savings were severely depleted. I had accumulated credit card debt for the first time since college. The monthly payment to the hospital was a constant reminder of both the accident and my parents' refusal to help. I knew I would eventually recover financially, but the stress of watching my carefully built security crumble was considerable. As the weeks passed, I had time to reflect on my relationship with my family and what I wanted going forward. I realized that the pattern I had observed throughout my life wasn't going to change. My parents would always favor Wesley. They would always have justifications for their unequal treatment. And if I continued to hope for equal love and support, I would continue to be hurt. It was a painful realization, but also freeing in a way. Once I accepted that my parents' behavior wasn't going to change, I could focus on changing my response to it. I could set boundaries that protected my emotional well-being. I could stop seeking validation from people who were fundamentally incapable of providing it. I made the decision to limit contact with my family for the foreseeable future. I declined the invitation to Easter dinner, the first holiday I would have been physically able to travel since the accident. I set up email filters that sent my family's messages to a separate folder that I could check when I felt emotionally prepared. I told my close friends about my decision, so they would understand if my family reached out to them with concerns. The first major holiday I spent entirely alone was Memorial Day weekend. Friends invited me to cookouts and gatherings, but I declined, feeling the need for solitude and reflection. The initial loneliness was intense, accompanied by waves of doubt about my decision. Was I overreacting? Was I punishing my family unfairly? Should I have tried harder to make them understand? But as the weekend progressed, I found a kind of peace in the quiet of my apartment. I cooked meals. I enjoyed caught up on books I'd been wanting to read, and spent time thinking about what kind of life I wanted to build moving forward. By Monday evening, I felt a clarity that had been missing for months. The decision to distance myself from toxic family dynamics wasn't about punishment, it was about creating space for healthier relationships and experiences in my life. The following weekend, Ryan and his girlfriend invited me to join them and some friends for dinner. For the first time since the accident, I felt genuinely engaged in social interaction, laughing and contributing to conversations without the dark cloud of family drama hanging over me. It was a small step, but an important one. I was beginning to see that life without my family's approval could still be rich and meaningful. For 6 months, contact with my family was minimal. Occasional text messages, brief email responses to direct questions, holiday cards, with no personal notes. These were the extent of our communication. I didn't visit Connecticut, and they didn't come to Boston. Wesley stopped reaching out entirely after I didn't respond to his angry text. During this time, my life continued to improve in other areas. My physical recovery progressed to the point where I only had occasional pain and a slight limp that the physical therapist assured me would eventually disappear with continued exercises. My financial situation stabilized as I received a performance bonus that helped replenish some of my depleted savings. I even started dating again, meeting Alicia at a friend's dinner party and finding an unexpected connection. Alicia was different from women I had dated before. She was a pediatric nurse with an innate kindness and emotional intelligence that made her easy to talk to. After a few dates, I found myself opening up about my family situation, something I had rarely done with anyone. Family dynamics are complicated, she said after listening to my story. But it sounds like you've made a healthy choice for yourself by creating some distance. Sometimes I wonder if I'm overreacting, I admitted. From what you've described, you're not asking them to change who they are or how they treat your brother, she pointed out. You're just asking for the basic respect and consideration any person deserves. That's not unreasonable. Her validation was healing in a way I hadn't expected. Having someone understand and support my perspective without questioning whether I deserved equal treatment was a new experience. It was in early October, nearly 7 months after my accident, when my parents made their first serious attempt to reconnect. I was at home on a Sunday afternoon, helping Alicia prepare dinner when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I checked the peephole before opening the door. To my shock, my parents were standing in the hallway. "Burton," my mother said, when I opened the door, her voice wavering slightly. "Surprise." They looked older than I remembered, more tired. My mother clutched her purse with both hands, a nervous gesture I recognized from childhood. My father stood slightly behind her, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing here?" I asked, not unkindly, but not welcoming either. "We were worried about you," my mother said. "You've been so distant. We thought it was time we talked in person." I hesitated, then stepped back to let them in. Alicia appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. I introduced her briefly, and she tactfully excused herself, saying she needed to run to the store for an ingredient. The three of us sat awkwardly in my living room. My mother looked around, commenting on how nice my apartment was, how well I had decorated it. My father remained mostly silent, nodding occasionally. "Why are you really here?" I finally asked when the small talk petered out. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We miss you, Burton. It's not the same without you. We want things to go back to how they were." "Back to how they were," I repeated slowly. "With me accepting less than Wesley gets. With me pretending not to notice the favoritism." "That's not fair," my father interjected, breaking his silence. "We've never favored one son over the other. We've treated you both according to your individual needs." It was the same justification they had always used, and it still rang hollow. "I needed help after my accident," I said quietly. "I needed my parents to be there for me in a crisis. You weren't." "We were in a difficult financial position at that time," my father insisted. "But not 2 weeks later, when you bought Wesley a vacation home, I asked the question hanging in the air between us." Neither of my parents had a response to that. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, and my father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I'm not angry anymore," I continued after a moment. "But I'm not willing to pretend everything is fine either. If we're going to have any relationship moving forward, it needs to be one where I don't constantly feel like the less important son." "What does that mean exactly?" My father asked, his tone cautious. "It means I need acknowledgement of the pattern that's existed our whole lives. It means I need boundaries that protect my emotional well-being. And it means I need time to figure out what kind of relationship I can have with you that doesn't leave me feeling diminished." My parents left disappointed, clearly, having expected a quick reconciliation rather than an honest conversation about our family dynamic. My mother hugged me tightly at the door, whispering that she loved me. My father shook my hand formally, saying they would respect my process, but hoped I wouldn't take too long to come around. After they left, Alicia returned and we finished preparing dinner together. "How did it go?" she asked gently. "About as well as could be expected," I replied. "They want things to go back to normal without addressing why they aren't normal in the first place. That's often easier than facing uncomfortable truths," she observed. Wesley's response to my parents' visit was predictably hostile. He called the next day, leaving a voicemail when I didn't answer. "Mom and Dad are really upset after seeing you yesterday," he said, his voice tight with anger. "I don't know what you said to them, but this whole victim act is getting old. You've always been jealous of my relationship with them. Grow up and stop hurting the people who have given you everything." I deleted the message without responding. A week later, my mother called to tell me they were having a family gathering for my father's birthday. I wasn't invited, or rather, the invitation came with the clear expectation that I would only be welcome if I was ready to put the past behind us. I declined politely. Through family friends, I learned that my parents had sold some investments to help Wesley start a small business venture to a boat rental service on Lake George near his new vacation home. The irony wasn't lost on me, but surprisingly, I felt no bitterness about it. Their financial choices were theirs to make. I was learning to separate my self-worth from their validation. My own life continued to improve. I received a significant promotion at work, moving into a leadership position that came with both increased responsibility and compensation. My relationship with Alicia deepened, moving from casual dating to something more meaningful. I expanded my circle of friends, reconnecting with college classmates who had moved to Boston and strengthening relationships with colleagues outside of work hours. Most importantly, I was developing a sense of peace about my family situation. Through conversations with Alicia, who had a remarkably balanced perspective, and through my own reflection, I was coming to understand that I could love my family without needing them to change or expecting them to meet my emotional needs. In December, nearly a year after my accident, I received a holiday card from my parents with a check enclosed. The amount was substantial, not enough to cover all my medical expenses, but a significant portion. A handwritten note from my mother read simply, "We want our son back in our lives. Please call us." I sat with the check for several days, turning it over in my hands, considering what it represented. It wasn't an acknowledgement of favoritism or an apology for their behavior. It was a transaction, money in exchange for resuming our previous relationship without addressing the underlying issues. After careful consideration, I returned the check with a note of my own. "Thank you for the gesture, but this isn't about money. It's about recognition and respect. I'm open to rebuilding our relationship, but it needs to be different than before." The 1-year anniversary of my accident arrived on a clear January day, markedly different from the snowy night that had changed so much in my life. Physically, I had made a complete recovery. The last traces of my limp had disappeared, and while I occasionally felt twinges in bad weather, I had regained full mobility and strength. Financially, I had finally paid off the last of my medical debts. It had taken discipline and sacrifice, but I had done it without tapping into retirement accounts or taking on long-term debt. My promotion had helped significantly, providing both a salary increase and a year-end bonus that allowed me to rebuild my emergency fund. Professionally, I was thriving in my new leadership role. My team respected me, and I had developed a management style that balanced high expectations with genuine support for my direct reports. Perhaps my own experiences had made me more attuned to the importance of recognition and encouragement. My relationship with Alicia had become the most meaningful partnership I had ever experienced. She had moved in with me 3 months earlier, and we were discussing long-term plans for the future. Her emotional intelligence and kindness continued to help me navigate complex feelings about my family and my own worth. It was in this context of stability and growth that I received an unexpected call from my mother. "Burton," she began, her voice tentative. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about what you said when we visited, about acknowledging the pattern in our family." I stayed silent, giving her space to continue. "I can't speak for your father," she went on after a moment, "but I need to tell you something. I think I may not have been fair in how I treated you and Wesley. It wasn't intentional, but looking back, I can see how it might have seemed that we valued him more." It wasn't a full acknowledgement of the favoritism I had experienced, but it was something, a crack in the wall of denial that had characterized all our previous conversations. "Thank you for saying that, Mom," I replied, genuinely moved by her effort. "It means a lot to hear you recognize that." "We're having a family dinner next weekend," she said. "Your father's retirement party. We'd really love for you to be there. Wesley and his girlfriend will be attending, and some extended family too." I hesitated, weighing the invitation. "I don't think I'm ready for a big family event yet," I said finally. "But I'd be open to meeting for coffee sometime when you're in Boston, or halfway between our cities." She seemed disappointed, but accepted my counteroffer. We arranged to meet at a cafe in Boston the following month when my parents would be in the city for a weekend getaway. When the day of the meeting arrived, I felt a mix of anxiety and hope. Alicia squeezed my hand before I left our apartment. "Remember," she said, "you get to define what this relationship looks like going forward. You're not obligated to accept anything that doesn't feel right to you." The cafe was busy, but not crowded when I arrived. My parents were already seated at a table near the window, my father checking his watch, and my mother arranging sugar packets. They looked up when I approached, their expressions a combination of nervousness and relief. The conversation was stilted at first, focused on safe topics like the weather, my father's retirement plans, local news. Gradually, though, we moved into slightly more personal territory. My job, their health, mutual acquaintances. My mother mentioned having started therapy, something that surprised me given her previous dismissal of mental health support as unnecessary for people with good families. "It's been helpful," she said, stirring her coffee. "It's given me perspective on some things." My father was less forthcoming, maintaining his usual reserve, but he seemed less defensive than during our previous interactions. He asked questions about my work that showed genuine interest rather than perfunctory politeness. We didn't directly address the favoritism or the vacation home situation. It wasn't the time for that conversation. But there was an unspoken acknowledgement in how they engaged with me, a carefulness, an attentiveness that hadn't been there before. As we parted outside the cafe, my mother hugged me, holding on a beat longer than usual. "I hope we can do this again," she said. "I'd like that," I replied, and found that I meant it. We established a new normal over the following months. Monthly phone calls with clear boundaries about what I was willing to discuss, occasional cafe meetings when they were in Boston, or I was passing through Connecticut. I declined invitations to family gatherings that included Wesley, explaining that I wasn't ready for that dynamic yet. My parents accepted these boundaries with minimal pushback, which itself was a significant change. Therapy had become an important part of my own healing process. With the help of a skilled therapist, I was unpacking the impact of childhood favoritism on my self-worth and relationships. I was learning to recognize the ways I had internalized messages about needing to earn love through achievement and self-sufficiency. Most importantly, I was developing compassion for both my younger self and for my parents, who for all their flaws had done what they believed was right based on their own limitations. Your parents may never fully acknowledge or understand how their behavior affected you. My therapist observed during one session, "Can you find peace with that possibility?" It was a challenging question, but over time, I found that I could. Understanding that my parents had their own blind spots and emotional limitations helped me separate their behavior from my worth as a person. I could recognize their favoritism without needing them to validate my experience of it. Wesley's situation changed dramatically during this period. His boat rental business failed within the first year, a victim of poor planning and his characteristic lack of follow-through. My parents continued to support him financially, covering his losses and helping him transition to a new venture. Through family friends, I learned they had sold additional investments to keep him afloat. Surprisingly, I felt no resentment about this continued pattern. Instead, I felt a kind of sadness for my brother. His dependence on our parents had prevented him from developing the resilience and self-sufficiency that had ultimately served me well. In trying to protect him from failure, they had denied him the opportunity to develop the strength that comes from overcoming adversity. I didn't envy him anymore. I pitied him. My own life continued to flourish. Alicia and I got engaged in the spring, planning a small ceremony for the following year. My career advanced further with an opportunity to lead a new development team on an innovative project. I maintained close friendships with people who valued me for exactly who I was, not for what I could achieve or provide. The most profound change, though, was internal. I no longer measured my worth by my parents' approval or compared myself to Wesley. I had found value in who I was, not in external validation or material success. The self-sufficiency that had once been a defense mechanism had transformed into a genuine strength, balanced now by the ability to be vulnerable and connect authentically with others. Today, my relationship with my parents remains limited but functional. We talk monthly exchange, holiday and birthday greetings, and occasionally meet in person. They attended my engagement party, making an effort to connect with Alicia and her family. These interactions are pleasant, but not deeply personal, a reflection of the natural consequences of our history together. I've learned that family isn't always who supports you most. During my darkest hours after the accident, it was friends who showed up with practical help and emotional support. It was colleagues who arranged meal deliveries and covered my projects without complaint. It was Alicia who later provided the unconditional acceptance I had always craved from my parents. I've learned that self-worth comes from within, not from external validation. No amount of achievement or self-sufficiency can fill the hole left by parental favoritism. That healing has to come from recognizing my inherent value as a person, separate from what I accomplish or provide. I've learned that boundaries are necessary with toxic relationships, even with family. Limiting contact isn't about punishment, it's about protection. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and others, is to create distance that prevents further harm. And I've learned that forgiveness doesn't always require reconciliation. I've forgiven my parents for their favoritism, understanding that they acted from their own limitations. That forgiveness has freed me from bitterness and allowed me to move forward. But forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the same dynamic that caused pain in the first place. I've learned that family isn't always about blood, but about who shows up when you're bleeding. While I'll always keep that door cracked open for my parents, I've built a life full of people who love me equally and unconditionally. That's something no vacation home could ever provide. Have you ever had to establish boundaries with family members who couldn't see how they were hurting you? What helped you find peace in that situation? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of overcoming family challenges. And if you know someone struggling with similar family dynamics, share this video with them. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these experiences is the first step toward healing. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by the strength and compassion you bring to the world.